We've had a shake-up of tertiary education unveiled today. It comes with the release of an interim report called the Australian Universities Accord. At its core, the report sets the expectation that over coming years, more and more jobs will require a university degree, and it's triggered a number of immediate actions from the government, even before there's a final report of this thing. That includes the setting up of new regional study hubs, improving access for Indigenous Australians, and introducing stronger reporting standards for student results. Education Minister Jason Clare outlined the government's response at the National Press Club today.
We live in a world today where almost every single job that's being created will require you to finish school and then go on to TAFE or to university. And that means we need more people to do that, not less. Rich, poor, city, bush, black and white. If you want to know what drives me, this is it.
And Jason Clare joins me now from Canberra. Thanks for your patience there, Jason Clare. So let's talk...
No, that's all right. How are you, mate?
I thought you might want to listen to Jeff Kennett. You know how it is. I mean, I will get your response to some of that in a sec.
You're not here. I thought you'd be here. I'm on my own here in the studio. You're back in Sydney.
Yeah, well, you wanted me there for the speech, no doubt. Now, let's talk about some of the plans here. This notion of giving free places to First Nations students in cities, as well as what the Morrison government did in regional areas. Talk us through the rationale there.
Maybe go back to the key point that's in this report. It says that more jobs are going to require a university qualification in the years ahead. It says that about 36% of the workforce has a uni degree today, and that by the middle of the century, that'll be about 55%. So that means more people at university. And at the moment, around about 1 in 2 Aussies in their 20s or 30s have a university degree, but not everywhere. Certainly not in my neck of the woods where I grew up in Western Sydney, same in the western suburbs of Brisbane, western suburbs of Melbourne, same in the bush, same in the regions. And for Indigenous Australians, whereas the average across the country is almost 1 in 2 young Aussies having a university degree, it's only 7% of young Indigenous Australians. If you're a young Indigenous bloke, you're more likely to go to jail than university at the moment. And at the moment, the way the law works is if you're a young Indigenous person who lives in, say, Townsville or Armidale or Port Hedland, then as long as you get the marks, you can get guaranteed access to university for the course that you're qualified for, what used to be called demand-driven. But the same rule doesn't apply if you live in a big city, and many Indigenous, almost 50% of Indigenous Australians live in our big cities. What this report says is if you apply the same rules to the city as the bush, then we could double the number of Indigenous Australians at university within a decade. And that strikes me as a good thing to do.
Well, I grew up in WA, as you know. I went to school with Aboriginal kids. That was after a brief period in your electorate growing up, by the way. I don't remember one of the Indigenous kids I went to school with that went to university, but I know of at least one that went to jail, illustrating your point. Nevertheless, there are parts of the Australian community who will resent this. I'm not going, we can't sugarcoat this. They feel that it's a decision made on race. Why should Aboriginal people get special treatment, as they'd see it, on tertiary education? What would you say to them?
Well, and just to be clear, what the report suggests in the back end of the report is that this is a model that could possibly work for everybody who lives in regional Australia and for poor kids right across the country as well. The big challenge we've got is that not enough people from our suburbs, not enough people from our regions are getting a crack at university. Postcode really is a brick wall for a lot of young people to get to uni. I saw it when I was growing up. A lot of people that I went to school with either didn't finish year 12 or they finished year 12 and they didn't go to uni because they thought it was so far away. It was for someone else, somewhere else. Growing up in Western Sydney, there was a lot of Macca's logos, a lot of KFC logos, not a lot of university logos. So the report is looking at what can we do to help more people from the suburbs, from the bush and Indigenous Australians all to get into university. Now, there's no other group of Aussies where there's a lower representation at university than Indigenous. And what the report says is that if this is happening in the regions, it should happen everywhere. But it takes the next step too, and it says maybe this is a model that we should roll out for all groups of Aussies that are underrepresented at uni at the moment.
Sure. So you're acting on Indigenous students now, but there's a prospect of a wider group being affected by it. Is that what you're saying?
Potentially, and this report's in two parts. There's a handful of recommendations that they want us to act on now this year, and we've said we'll do that. And then there's about 75 big ideas in the report where they want feedback from the general community over the next couple of months. They'll give us their final report at the end of the year. So the idea I just mentioned there is one of those 75. We're keen to get people's feedback on the whole report over the next few months so that we get a report at the end of the year that's a real long-term plan to set us up for the future.
All right. Now, there's a couple other changes here you're introducing immediately. I think I'll mention them both together, then I'll play you something. Just bear with me. There's a higher education continuity guarantee you want to extend and abolishing the 50% pass rule. I'll get you to explain that in a minute. But in relation to that, This is what a former Education Minister, Dan Tehan, told us about earlier in the program. He said it would mean students would rack up greater HECS debts. Have a listen.
We want to make sure that universities take students on who can complete courses and give them the support that they need to complete those courses, not give them a free pass when it comes to taking a multitude of students on in any areas. Those students then fail, and then they're allowed to do more courses and fail again and build up a giant HECS debt.
All right, Jason Clare, can you react to that and explain the changes?
Yeah, look, I can understand Dan's position. He introduced that, so he's got to defend what he did. But the real life impact of that's playing out right now at the university in Western Sydney University. We've seen 1,350 kids basically get forced out of university in the last few months, about 13,000 right across the country because the way this rule works. And predominantly, overwhelmingly, these are kids from poorer backgrounds. They're also kids from the regions going to regional universities.
Well, how does it work?
What we should be trying to... Well, the way it works is if you fail more than half of the first 8 units of your course, so more than half of your first year, then you're no longer eligible for Commonwealth funding for that course. So they're effectively forced to quit. Now, what we should be doing is trying to help those young people succeed and pass, not kicking them out of uni, not when we've got a report that says more people have got to go to uni to get the skills we need for the economy of the future, and not when the report says that we need more people from poorer backgrounds than the bush going to uni. So what this report says is get rid of this rule, but at the same time, make sure that universities are using the funding that they're given to help young people to pass the courses. Now, I think you touched on another recommendation about that funding guarantee. That's exactly what that's about. Right. Making sure that universities use that money to provide the academic and learning support for these young people who need a bit of extra help. We know, Andrew, that if you're from a poor background or from the bush, you're less likely to finish your uni degree than other students. About 60% do rather than 70%. So they need a bit of extra support at university to finish the course. Some of that might be because you're not living at home. Some of it might be just because of the things that are happening at home. But universities have got to play a better role here in helping those bright young people finish their degree. And that's what that's about.
Now, you came on the show a while back and said that you thought ever since it became clear the Voice wasn't bipartisan, it would be much tougher to win. And the polls have since proved you right. What did you make of what Jeff Kennett was saying there, separating the question?
Oh, look, I just point you back to what the Prime Minister said. This is something that Indigenous Australians have asked us to do and put it together. If there was a serious consideration by the opposition to break this apart into 2 questions, then you'd think they would have proposed this as an amendment to the bill that went through the Parliament a couple of weeks ago. But there was none. You know, like in all of the conversations that Peter Dutton's had with Anthony Albanese, he hasn't suggested an amendment. In all of the debate that happened in Parliament, where if you wanted to go down this path and break it up, there was no amendment. So I don't know that that's really a serious option that's been proposed.
All right, what's the way to win this and what happens if it fails?
Look, I know it's tougher, but I do have faith. You know, Aussies are the sort of people who don't want to leave their mates behind, who want to look after their fellow Aussie. And there are a group of Australians who are behind at the moment. You know, if you're a young Indigenous person today, you're more likely to die at birth than the rest of us. You're more likely to fall behind at school than the rest of us. You're more likely not to finish school than the rest of us. You're more likely to go to jail than to university. Now think about this, Andrew. The cost of putting someone in the clink for a year is 120 grand. The cost of putting someone through university, the Commonwealth contribution to that, is 11 grand a year. So more than 10 times the amount to put somebody in jail as to put somebody through university. That's what we mean when we talk about if you listen to people, pick their brains, get better ideas, you get a better use of taxpayers' money and better outcomes.
Jason Clare, Education Minister, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
No worries. Thanks, mate.